Great guests for you. We have Bloomberg editor Bobby Ghosh and the executive director of Muslim Advocates, Farhana Khera. It's great to have you both. Thank you for joining us. I wish it were for a different conversation, but thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's get people on the same page. Bobby, the president says, no, it's not that big a deal. All you have to do is do a quick Google, and you'll see that along with the emergent migrant situation, you're seeing full-blown leaders all throughout Europe, probably half a dozen countries, have moved extremely to the white, to the white, that's pun unintended, to the right in terms of this extremism of politics. And we've been seeing violence like this. How do you quantify it, Bobby?
Well, it's hard to pick numbers, but we can look at what intelligence agents around the world are telling us. American intelligence agents, intelligence agencies here in Europe are saying the same thing. They're seeing a rise in this pattern of hate and dissemination of hate online. They're seeing a rise in hate crimes. We're seeing this manifest itself in anti-Semitism, quite a lot of it here in Europe. And of course, we're seeing it in the rise of Islamophobia. People of color around the world being attacked in communities that are primarily white. So the evidence, the anecdotal evidence is overwhelming. There may not be accurate data that captures the full scale of this, but it's impossible to ignore the daily drumbeat of this. Every day you open the paper, somewhere in the world there has been a race, a crime committed by a white supremacist, call it alt-right, call it what you may, against somebody who's either brown skin or Jewish or Muslim. And it's just, you can't ignore it anymore.
And Farhana, here in the United States, we've seen in 3 of the last 4 years upticks. They were up years. One of those 4 years, it was actually went down. But last year, they were I think, 50-something killings that were related to this, 70+% of them. 50 deaths last year, 78% of them were accountable to white supremacy, supremacists, and 2% Islamist extremists. Now, of course, the Muslims get all the attention. If a Muslim did something like this, you'd know all about who the killer was. And the president would have probably jumped on it as terror and, re-argued that this is a threat, but not when it's this. He plays it down. How big is the reality here at home?
Yeah, there is a very big reality, as your graphic just showed, Chris. And the fact is that it's not just the president downplaying the threat and refusing to even acknowledge that the white national threat is a threat to our safety. But unfortunately, under both Democratic and Republican administrations over the last decade or so, we have not seen the level of attention and resources that should be devoted to this issue. So just to give you a couple of examples, even in 2009, in the first term of the Obama administration, the Obama Department of Homeland Security kiboshed a report that was being put out to begin to look at the threat being posed by right-wing white nationalist movements. And we've also seen the FBI invert those resources. So as your graph shows, you would think that the majority of our FBI counterterrorism agents should be focused on the threat being posed here domestically, and they're not. The vast, vast majority, 90% of FBI agents, are focused on the threat presented by ISIS and Al-Qaeda and those groups. So there needs to, this is hopefully, I'm hoping that this will be a wake-up call for the FBI to reset its priorities.
Bobby, we've had a string of little ones here. We have this horrible tendency to only measure problems by death. And if, somebody has the most virulent of intentions, but they only kill a couple of people, we don't see it as big a deal if you kill 49. And of course, lethality matters, lives matter, but they are not a direct relationship to the size of a threat, Bobby. And whether it was this guy in the Coast Guard who just put us on the list, or the guy with the pipe bombs, if they want to act and they keep trying to find ways to act, eventually they're going to be successful.
Especially if you're talking about countries where lethal weapons are within an arm's reach of desire, to use the old marketing phrase. The problem is that, as Farhana just said, that law enforcement agencies aren't paying adequate attention. But the good news, if you want to see the glass half full, is that all the lessons that law enforcement have learned from tracking the spread of Islamist hate online and in sort of on the dark web, all of those skills can quite easily be turned around and brought to bear on this problem. And if you put that energy, you put all the technology that has been developed, all the smarts that have been developed, if you put that into the service of tracking down the dissemination of sort of racist hate crime, you can fix this problem quite quickly.
You can, but there's a but.
The question is of desire.
Yes, it's political will. And this is the legacy of 9/11 and the war, is that Muslims were the monsters. Muslims were the boogeymen. And then we started to have rational conversations about, well, you can't talk about 1 billion people the same way. You have to see this little slice for what it is. You got to look at the poverty. You got to look at the disaffection. But there's a legacy to that, Farhana, and it takes political will. I don't know that we have it in this administration. He'll talk all day about Islam and the menace that it is, and that it doesn't like, you know, as if it were a person, you know, that Islam doesn't like America. Do you think there's any chance that even in the eyes of this type of tragedy, because it happened somewhere else, that political will would change?
So, you know, and I want to say, Chris, that I actually think there's a problem with a lack of political will on both the Democratic and the Republican side. You know, again, even under the Obama administration, when there was a heinous attack in Charleston, the FBI director at the time was almost dismissive of Dylann Roof's motives, which were to create a race war. And so we actually need, and again, I'm hoping that this is going to be a wake-up call for elected officials and the FBI, because even members of Congress have a role to play. On the Democratic and Republican side, they can call the FBI director, Chris Wray, and demand that he provide a briefing to them and notify Congress about what level of priority is the FBI giving to this issue. And Congress can actually specifically appropriate resources to the FBI to ensure that it's giving adequate attention to this threat. So there's a lot more that needs to be done for both the Democratic and Republican side, and we have a long way to go, but we really need to come together as a country to address this threat head on.
Well, look, that has to be the way we approach these, is that out of the tragedy, you try to come together. So thank you, my friends, for being with me tonight. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
All right. You know, and look, think about it. 49 people in New Zealand, right? Last year, 78% of 50 people killed was because of white extremism. So it's about 37. Imagine if it were all in one event. God forbid. Imagine if I were covering that, if I were standing in front of that place right now, somewhere here in America. Would that make a difference politically? See, that's part of the mix here, and a president that ignores the problem doesn't help. Now, look, I think the president should be trying to lower the temperature, all right? And that's something we have to discuss. But first, on a day like today, the president felt a need to play the victim with the Mueller report nearing. And he said something that literally no other member of his party in the House said. He said, no report. What does that mean? Starting point for a great debate next.